Chatter with Daniel Sean Kelly.
I'm not that big on the idea of about. I think one version of about would be to suggest that there's like a particular kind of world or like particular themes or images that I'm trying to work with. But I think generally I try to let the work lead me a little bit. I'm quite interested in the things that rise up in the process of drawing or making or painting or and not trying to have too much control over planning like a specific thing that you're gonna depict or a certain kind of image that you're gonna make. But all of that can feel like a bit of a kind of like get out of jail card or like fobbing off. I think one of the last crits that I did, which was probably about a year ago, when I spoke about that green painting. That one. And I'd forgotten this actually, but yeah, Dan Cowland said something like, I think I was being similarly evasive about what, not necessarily, well, basically he said sooner or later it has to be about something. I think was what Dan said. And I've occasionally ruminated on that since. And I think it's still not really about, it's still not really the way that I frame it. It's more about, there's like a phrase that I've kind of had in my head for a while to do with like thinking of art or the art that I'm trying to make as a way to conjure rare affect. And by that I kind of mean affects that are not commonplace in lived experience, or formations and possibilities of being that are less likely to arise in day-to-day existence or something like that. Things that kind of make you feel a bit uneasy or that don't quite fit the sort of usual way that the world behaves or operates. I think those are the things that's probably the nearest I could come to like what's it about, is attempting to capture some of those feelings, but I don't know necessarily how much I succeed in that at the moment or not. But does that make sense or
No,
no?
kind of. Hard to wrap my head around that.
I'm happy to go further into that because I think it'd be useful for me as well.
Go on then.
Well, you ask and we'll.
Would you talk about states of being that we don't normally experience every day? That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, do you feel like an outsider when you're painting? Like, what do you feel like you're?
I'm laughing because someone asked me that before, and I thought it was a funny question then as well.
Because if you're not trying to represent normal states of being, like what's going on in the world, then you're not spectating the world, but you must be spectating something from the outside, like over-analysing it or to thinking about what people are thinking about rather than what they're doing. Or I don't know. What's someone thinking about when they're at work? You know, in the back of the mind when it becomes automatic.
I think so. I suppose what I mean is like, well, so to kind of frame that idea, another thing that I've been thinking about, and that I used to frame my work in the terms of sort of thinking about possible realities, or sort of not necessarily like the idea of the future, but the idea of worlds is like something that I've thought about quite a bit and written about on my masters and stuff, and you know, this sort of like particular model that exists for popular culture and films and books and stuff is that commonly we sort of organise things into worlds, and then that it's become quite a sort of popular notion in sort of art and theory terms to think about, you know, the possible world different to what we inhabit now, whether that's politically or socially or technologically, and that, you know, to figure our current state of living as a form of stasis in which, you know, the future has been cancelled, the project of modernity is stalled. So one of the kind of proposals that people put forward is that art or popular culture is a sort of mechanism for imagining other possible realities, and that doing that can be helpful when the social formations would seek to keep things the same. But I kind of became quite tired with that notion of that way of thinking, and I think to a big extent that can only be a way of kind of kicking the can down the road and deferring to some future point, or like prefiguratively saying that there has to be a proposal, when I'm kind of more interested in the idea that all possibilities are flattened into one reality, or one preeminent now, in which being is a kind of flattened mesh of. I think the idea of possibility is still there, but I'm kind of interested in a sort of like maximalist vision in which you know, in your imagination. So say like you're saying when you're at work and you just think about things, or you know, you daydream or enter a kind of creative mindset, for there to be no negative, like no notion of no, like only a kind of additive maximalist vision in which things become more, you know, more complicated. I think that's the way that the images that I've been making, paintings that I've been making have been moving, is towards a kind of texture of complexity in which it's like things don't exist just as sort of singular entities. They become sort of split and multitudinous, and sort of like, you know, a being is not just one being, it becomes a kind of mass of beings that are entangled and have different permutations and sort of versions of themselves, but you know, that a singular being might be split across multiple bodies, or like these are all the kind of notions that I'm sort of trying to depict and think about. But
So if you have more than one figure in a painting, that could be the same person,
yeah,
maybe doing different tasks or
yeah,
different points in one task.
yeah, there's a kind of shared consciousness between, I think, so one of the powers of painting and image making, but I suppose particularly if you make images in which there's clearly people or figures that we would understand as human, we have a relationship to those images as, you know, people who inhabit a body and have a sense of our own being. Painting or any other kind of sort of image making where you start from zero allows you to try out different formations of that. I think they're much more potent when you make a singular image, as opposed to if I was to, you know, try to live some of these other possibilities through performance or in life, or whereas a painting arrives at its viewer as a kind of whole thing. It's a kind of like impactful statement in which doesn't really leave a kind of space for deniability. It's like, yeah, whereas if you try to sort of perform these things, which some people might do as art or as prefigurative forms of living, you know, you can only ever do that in the realm of the real, in the realm of kind of social reality. But I think I'm interested in creating work that we have a relationship to as social beings, but it's not in any way social realist. Like, it doesn't really relate to the way that, you know, the mundanity of our lives or our political machinations. It's but at the same time, I kind of see it as like a kind of provocative thinking point to sort of say, you imagine that these things are, you know, all that is possible is real. Like, all of the, you know, if you can imagine it, that's enough of a proposal for philosophically for these things to be a real formation. It's not existing somewhere else. It's existing here as an image, but that image becomes a kind of puncture point in reality, or I don't know. It's going to sound convoluted because it is. It's not clear. It's like, but I wouldn't want it to be. I mean, I'm not being deliberately obfuscatory. I'm not trying to like just confuse people into shutting up. I genuinely think that art is a way to try and express some of the things that you can't express in words or in writing. But I don't know what.
I think that too. I think that's why a lot of people paint or make art. They find it hard to express things.
Yeah.
Or maybe people would pull funny faces if you try to express things with words that are that abstract or complicated or whatever. Yeah, it's easier to look at a picture to figure out an idea than read a you know, even a short paperback book about like some sort of philosophical idea. Yeah. Well, some of the colour palettes, why do you always use Like quite limited colour palettes.
I don't really know why. I didn't always. And then I'm trying to think when I kind of started doing that. So I suppose my journey in painting, to use like a kind of corny phrase. So I suppose I've been painting in a similar way to this since probably about 2014, something like that. And the first things that I was painting were quite kind of, I suppose you could say, realistic. So I can grab some. Just grab a handful of these. So these kind of came out of sculptures that I was making before that were of what I felt to be sort of like basic, kind of basic objects, or sort of like platonic ideal solids. So like rocks and branches and sort of like quite kind of archetypal solid things that, so like some of the sculptures that are up there, like the crown and stuff like that, they were kind of in that kind of mode. So things that a child would recognise, like, you know, the first set of uncomplicated objects that you would encounter and understand, almost like, you know, A is for apple, C is for crown, things like that. But then, yeah, I started doing these sort of like imagined landscapes. I think one of the first ones was, I don't know, I've got it here, it'd be on the shelf, but one of a cave that I did, just sort of from imagination, just as a kind of like archetypal cave, and then stuff like log. Yeah, like forest. Sort of almost, yeah, like images from dreams. Like the forms that these things would take just in your kind of subconscious mind.
Right.
And sort of like, yeah, that was a bit like the cave one, sort of landscapes that, from the perspective of someone who grew up in England or whatever, you would imagine as a sort of like a base level of the world almost without people. But then, yeah, it started to have like figures in them, and like that one, it's like maybe like a dead body, someone impaled on a branch. And they would, I think all of these things are in the same kind of continuum of thought, in terms of like sort of essentially like thought experiments, like have, I suppose, quite a lot in common with the ways that you would end up thinking about the world if you played video games quite a bit. And I don't that much now, but did quite a bit as a child, and I think, yeah, just I suppose the idea of a kind of populating a landscape, or sort of placing things and seeing how they interact, or what will happen between them. So that was kind of like, I did those for a year or two, for the sort of like first half of this kind of phase where I've painted continuously, because I have before in the past, but I suppose of this project, it was quite a quick turnaround in which my sort of style and way of painting and things that I was painting would change on almost like a yearly basis. So then, yeah, there was loads of these paintings I did of like men fighting. That's, yeah, I suppose just an example, but there were loads like that. And then I struggle to remember what came after that. Then there was sort of like this phase where it became a little bit less sort of realistic and a little bit more kind of naive.
Yeah.
That's kind of based on a thing, I can't remember what it's called. There's a sort of like myth or story to do with someone riding on the back of a horse, but in sort of like Staffordshire pottery, so sort of like primitive pottery from early 1800s. That story would be depicted usually as the person riding on the back of a zebra, and I just thought it was quite a funny image, to be honest, and that's where those kind of things came from. And then somehow that developed into these ones that were like I think I was doing these about 2016, so about 5 years ago.
Right.
So these have like quite a lot in common with the stuff that I've been making in the last year. And yeah, I think in a lot of ways I'm kind of revisiting some of the unfinished ends of these ideas. But yeah, I suppose just sort of thinking a bit more about like costume or, I don't know, clothes and the ways that they're an easy shorthand to sort of certain types of archetypes, or like, I don't know, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, like forms of being, again, that would be sort of familiar to children, or like yeah, not out of place in a children's book, but to take those things and kind of multiply them or exaggerate them to a degree where they become kind of absurd, or, you know, feel like they can't hold up under their own weight anymore. And then I had a period of doing ones that definitely were more specifically a bit kind of science fiction-y. So they're all stuck together because I wrapped them in cling film. So that kind of thing. I was at that point definitely thinking a lot more about cloning and genetic engineering and androids and stuff like that. And then, yeah, I think since then just kind of come round to the idea of yeah, I don't really want things to be situated as easily kind of situated as that. But the question you asked me was about colours. So I think from that kind of phase onwards, I then started to do some that were just in a single, yeah, either just like monochrome, so red and white. And to begin with, that happened because I was thinking about certain images as, yeah, taking place within a dream. So that's why one good example. So I think I called that the dream about the volcano. And yeah, the sort of monochrome thing was a way to delineate what was within a dreamscape or like a memoryscape, and what was within, you know, what was meant to be physically kind of happening. And then I think I just kind of carried on with that sort of limited palette from that point onwards, and find it really useful as a way to kind of I think because I'm not necessarily like a natural painter, or like I haven't been like trained as a painter. So I think limiting how many colours you use quite a good way to force you to like think about technique a little bit more. Because I think it's quite easy. You can just not to say I don't like this in other people's work, but I think it's like if you can use every colour, it just becomes kind of a bit of a mush of, you know, it's easy to just keep adding stuff and like.
Yeah, I watched a Gordon Ramsay clip the other day where he's having a go at a chef for using lots of different flavours in the same dish, and just like make your mind up about what you're going to make.
Yeah.
This indecisiveness isn't very good.
Yeah.
You know, sort of like vomit.
Yeah.
Like too many colours.
I mean, this doesn't really go in with what I was saying earlier about a kind of maximalist vision.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I suppose by that logic, really, I shouldn't restrict. I should probably use every colour and you know, make it more uncomfortable for people to look at.
When you were talking about maximalism, it was like, well, not very literal at all. It's hard to understand. So, I suppose if you're using a limited colour palette, I suppose it's similar to writing, because that's just black and white.
Yeah.
But it still has lots of different complicated ideas within writing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can't claim to be sort of like puritanically maximalist, because I think, the things that I'm depicting and do have a kind of, I am choosing what to paint and what not to paint, and even though it might look quite complicated and like there's quite a lot going on, there is still only, so like the last big one that I did, which was hard to get out, but there's only like a set number of kind of objects. There's like a ladder, book, 2 different types of figure, and then parts of things that they're wearing, like glasses and shoes and stuff like that. Those are the only objects, but the permutations in which they're exploded into the space is kind of uncomfortably kind of loaded in a way that
all the figures look very similar, apart from the things they wear and the objects around them. In your paintings, they all look like dummies or mannequins or something.
They're usually expressionless and sort of just essentially a kind of generic face. I don't really go. I mean, that green one was a bit of an exception, and I've just maybe that there's a little bit more kind of distinction between some of the faces, like that one. But yeah, generally speaking, they're kind of they're not that distinct. Like they don't look like real people. Like, and they're not meant to be real people. I suppose they're meant to be more of like an avatar or a kind of.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it makes thinking about archetypes easier, as archetypes just things around you that you were, and I don't know, activities.
Don't think of them as being sort of invested with personality, or I'm not really like seeing them as complete beings, or sort of, you know, they're not meant to have the suggestion of a life outside the painting.
Right.
I suppose that's maybe one way in which people would make images or make worlds. It's that you're meant to imagine what else happens there, or but I think that's kind of, I'm more interested in them as like avatars without users, sort of just flattened suggestions of being, or like sprites, like non-player characters.
Yeah. I kept thinking to say that.
So like
They definitely look exactly like the meme of a non-player character.
Or kind of, when we play Goldeneye and like every henchman looks the same, or maybe there's like 2 or 3 different variations of a henchman. That's kind of, I suppose, is my era of
Golden what?
Goldeneye, like on the N64, as kind of, I think, coming of age in the sort of 64-bit age of N64 and PlayStation 1 has probably got quite a lot to do with how I see the world or think about these things. In which there's a kind of a possibility, but a sort of limited permutations with endless possibility, or something like that. The colour question though, so like the ones that I'm doing now, so all of the ones that I showed you there, I always used to paint in one go pretty much, but as of very recently I've started to spend a bit longer on things, partially out of kind of frustration that a lot of the time it would be 9 out of the 10 things that I would paint I wouldn't like, and I would paint over them, but partially from not having as much time to paint, and feeling a bit frustrated by that kind of rate of success. I've started to take a bit longer on things and try to work out what actually makes a successful painting and what doesn't, and then also to sort of try and have a kind of depth that you can't really build up in one sitting. I'm still just using two pigments and white, but I try to have parts on them where they're almost black through the layering and blending of those pigments. Still find that like a really useful, it's a useful limitation creatively, but then also I think it is useful in sort of marking it out as the world, but not our world, not socially real. Through a kind of flattening filter, I suppose, of the colour relationships. Sorry.
Literally.
Yeah. And also that I usually use relatively primary, just red, green, blue, because I'm interested in the sort of like visual interferences and vibrations and stuff that you can make happen between sort of like quite clashing, quite solid blocks of colour, and how you can make the space that you're depicting behave if you have that kind of quite limited tonal range, I suppose.
And are the pots part of your practice?
Yeah. I'm gonna get a few pots there for sure. So I think if there's an older one I can show you. Still away a bit deeper now, but been making ceramic stuff quite a while as well.
Yeah.
Probably kind of similar amount of time to doing the painting. And kind of recently-ish came back to it, which was largely prompted by Lucy having her kiln here. But I'll just talk about this one just as this is kind of the most recent one that I'm actually happy with, because I feel like it's developed in a good way. But yeah, I think they kind of happened kind of concurrently with the things that I was thinking about in the paintings, but then also in the etchings I was doing a few years ago. So like the one that you've got one of those etchings, and like the frame on that where it's kind of got these kind of scratched almost like doodly kind of bits in the frame that kind of going for this kind of suggestion of like a school desk, or just kind of crude carving essentially, like, and of sort of objects again that are kind of platonic ideals, or sort of.
Do you think those sort of, like maybe a post in the middle of nowhere with some sort of symbol on, it holds a story within it of a journey, or I don't know, a feeling? Like, what made them want to scratch that thing into the post or the desk? Do you think about that?
Yeah, I suppose it's like a trace, isn't it? But I'm kind of keen, this kind of runs through all of it really, is that I don't really want to kind of do a sort of faux naive, sort of like faux outsider art kind of thing, because I think that's kind of seductive, like all of those images are, but I think all of those things are much more, a large part of why sort of folk art and things are enjoyable is on the basis of how and why they were made, or that they weren't made under the pretense of being an art object. And I think I can't claim otherwise than to be making art, and knowing that I'm making art. So I'm kind of, that's one of the things that I've still not fully kind of worked out or comfortable with, is that some of it gestures towards things that are more kind of folky or sort of like outsidery. But I think it's the images or sort of symbols or objects take on a kind of potency when someone who isn't an artist chooses to depict them. It's like what made someone do that, not for the reason of art, like just out of pure sort of expression or frustration, or a kind of communication maybe, or
I think evidence, really. or an instruction.
Yeah, I suppose. Like cave painting or cave art. I suppose it's about how.
It's like the idea of riddles in alchemy. Sort of an instruction or ingredients list, but it's sort of abstracted to keep it secret
Right.
within a certain group of people.
Mm.
And I think that's the same as like slang, like working class language.
Mm.
It's, I suppose it's an art form. Language is an art form. There's just different ways. Everything's just a different way of saying something.
Yeah, I think maybe I'm interested in symbols divorced from language, or like I'm not trying to make things in a symbolic way. I'm not trying to sort of communicate there isn't something to work out, and then you will have won or sort of like got to the bottom of it. I think I'm more interested in the symbol or the pictogram or the marker, just on the sort of like pure non-linguistic level of how it's functioning, and sort of pulling your arm somehow, like kind of jerking you out of your daydream, and it with the sort of suggestion of significance, or I don't know, all of that could sound a bit like I'm trying to look like I've got something to say when I don't have anything to
The
say.
suggestion of significance. Never heard anyone say that before.
Yeah. But I don't want to have control over what that significance is or what that narrative is. I'm more interested in these things being able to sort of form their own. I don't know if that also doesn't sound too much like I'm sitting on the fence. These things can operate without us, or to some degree, like they have an internal logic or sense making, or a generation of affects, coming back to that idea, like not reliant upon human agency, or like me as a kind of storyteller or something to decide what's being spoken about. But yeah, so it's a long-winded way to say that the first ones of these had, which is similar to some more recent ones but a bit cruder, this is not my favourite one, but just kind of a sort of wide-ranging set of objects or symbols or sort of things on them where I wouldn't particularly plan it too much, but I suppose was drawing from a particular vocabulary of objects or symbols, and would just do it at the point of making the pot. But then where they've started to go, that one's the same actually. Sorry, I hope it's not annoying.
It's alright. What's the squiggly line one?
Squiggly line. Oh, these ones.
No, that one. The like that one.
These?
Yeah.
They're ones that I don't like very much.
Really?
Yeah, I'm probably gonna just redecorate them somehow.
Huh.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the reason I don't like those is because maybe they just, to me, felt too much like homewares. I mean, I like that kind of line. It's got a bit of a kind of Van Gogh-y feeling to it. But then, yeah, to me, I felt uncomfortable about them just feeling a bit too easily like they could exist, like something you could buy from Habitat.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, so
So what's the difference between your stuff and the stuff you can buy in Habitat?
yeah, that's a good area to talk about, I think.
It doesn't feel like a lifestyle brand.
No. I'm kind of aware because I have sold pots on Instagram, usually just as kind of to stop them building up the studio, because particularly like last year in lockdown I made loads and loads, made like one every day for a bit, so I had a lot of pots and was just sort of pretty much working on my technique and the actual act of hand building them. And it feels seductive as an artist for people, for people to enjoy what you're making and want to own it. And I'm at peace with the idea that I make things that quite a lot of the time people will be happy to have in their houses. Like, it's not abject. It's like usually quite enjoyable things, and you can make a bit of money doing that. But I think because I only have a kind of limited amount of time to make art, I kind of want to make the things, prioritise making the things that lead me down paths of thought, or provoke me to think differently or find new.
What's an example of that? What thoughts have you been thinking about when you've been making your pots?
Yeah. So these have developed on from the ones that are more like a kind of just sort of general catalogue of symbols that could have like a relation to things like Portmeirion ware, or I can't remember what they're called, something like plowware, or like plough jugs. That's sort of a kind of Victorian tradition of doing that. And these are kind of alluding to that, but now thinking much more about the pot as a kind of sort of like a consciousness, but not in like an object-oriented way. More that sort of each pot is kind of like a fragment of a sort of brain, or a kind of technology, a kind of like bit of a memory chip or something, like. So there is much more definition in terms of what images are on here now, and they're usually kind of incomplete and sort of bleed into each other. And I think I'm trying to sort of depict the way that a consciousness works, in which things are not defined, or so like this one. Don't know whether can you see that well on that, or shall I hold it a bit closer?
That's all right.
There.
Yep.
I don't. Again, like it's not too definitive. It's not like I've written a story and I'm transferring it onto here. But there's a kind of set of things that are happening, or are kind of meant to be being projected outward onto the surface, that could be sort of like fragments of sort of slightly traumatic memories, or sort of kind of like trauma dreams, or like uneasy, the kind of uneasy circumstances that your subconscious mind would kind of bring to the fore in a dream, but can't really be pinned down too well. And partially, it's just a case of kind of what comes up in the process of making, like where after inscribing one thing, what do I think of next? What's the next thing that moves on to there? So yeah, they're becoming much more sort of like I don't know, I'm kind of interested in this provocation of them being sort of non-electronic sort of memory receptacles, or like conscious units. Like a jug has quite a lot of personality because it's got a front and a back and like a bit of a belly and like shoulders, and can't help but have personality in a way that a bottle or like a vase doesn't have. It has a right and a wrong way to point. It's got a front and a back. It's got a nose. And then, because then I've been making the things which I've been describing as jug houses that started off as plinths.
Jug houses.
Jug houses. So like that's one that I can easily get to, but so yeah, for the members show here at Two Greens last year, I made those plinths that sort of were a bit like empty speaker cabinets. And that was kind of partially because I was thinking about the jugs a bit like, I don't know, beer bottles or something that would accumulate as a sort of sculptural volume in relationship to other things. So like after a party or like a club night or whatever, that bottles sort of like congregate in corners or like any surface that can have a bottle on it. And then so those plinths were kind of speakerish, but then I felt like they were a bit too easily sort of shoddy, and I wanted to kind of make something that was take a bit longer and more defined, and like try to make something a bit better, like challenge myself a little bit. So yeah, I've made 3 of these now, but it's an ongoing thing. But calling them jug houses, and are meant to kind of exist in relation to the jugs as kind of like a model village or a sort of crazy golf course, or it's not necessarily that this is the world that jugs live in. It's that this is the part of it that's filtered down to us. Most of them have a kind of suggestion of modernism in the sort of like curved bits. This one less so, but sort of like an inverted modernist architecture, or like what an architecture for jugs would be, and then that they kind of have their own vernacular, and sort of a bit of a suggestion of kind of like a sort of Portmeirion style, uneasy kind of mashing of bits of kind of European, sort of Middle European fairy tale architecture somehow, that combined with modernist curves and flat roofs. And yeah, I'm interested in those things in relationship to the paintings and those things existing in the same space. So again, yeah, the members show last year, because that was like the only exhibition I did last year, was the first time so just in a kind of simple way, like showed a jug under a painting, and that they were, I was kind of under the green one actually, thinking of them as one piece of work. Kind of done that before, but yeah, I don't think that the paintings require activating through sculpture, and I wouldn't want to just kind of like literally turn what's in a painting into a kind of sculptural form, or it's more about what does one thing suggest, like what type of object or family of, there's like the Wittgenstein thing about like family resemblance, where it's to do with two objects can have family resemblance, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are actually identifiably like each other. Like you couldn't really put your finger and say like, oh, they're related because they both have this thing in common.
Mm-hmm.
Family resemblance is a harder to define thing than that, where somehow it's just about a sort of notion of essence or affect that they have in common, or like a relationship with the world. I don't know. I feel like, in my mind, those things, the pots and the paintings, I don't know. I'm not saying it's not done. It's by no means done. Like there could be more successful types of each of those that would. But yeah, again, it's a kind of an uneasy relationship between them, which I don't think they need to be made more like each other, or kind of. Definitely, there can be a thing when you're making art where you feel like, what's within my practice and what isn't within my practice. I'm like, oh, I have a certain aesthetic or like a certain style of working or something, and like I'll only make things in that mould. That's like an easy rut to get stuck in.
I think they relate well. The handles on the jugs and just the shape of them remind me of the paintings, even without the engravings or drawings on them, because the types of I don't know, brush strokes and shapes and things that you make the figures and objects out in your paintings.
Yeah.
That relate to the jugs, and also the jug houses.
Yeah.
The big corridor.
Yeah.
Or doorway.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought about it that way, because I'd kind of forgotten that form was like quite a particular thing that I've arrived at. Like it's not just like it's a kind of archetypal jug, but actually it's not really like any kind of jug you would buy at a shop.
No.
Or like it has the suggestion of a kind of modernist simplicity to it, and a kind of solid utilitarian straight side, curved sides. Yeah, the curve is kind of like, it's not it's not ergonomic. That's maybe an interesting thought. It's kind of pretty kind of solid and like, but you know, it's just a simple radius. It's not like a, you know, if you like hand pull a handle, like a kind of handmade studio pottery kind of thing, then you would probably have like a part where it was quite thick and then a part where it got thinner and so on. But, so yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought about it that way. And then, but similarly in those sculptures, that yeah, there's parts of it that are quite you know, solidly straight lines, sort of like a curve and a straight line. But then there's kind of textures within it that are more complex. Yeah, I usually enjoy creating those kinds of tensions in the work where there'd be parts that are like parts that hold together well, and then parts that feel like they could fall apart, or parts that are neat and parts that are messy, and sort of yeah, that's true.
Trying to think of something else to say.
Yeah, I don't want to bombard you with
So, is that a drawing you've done? Did you do a few drawings when you're thinking about what you're going to paint on this large support here?
Yeah. So yeah, when I used to, a lot of the painting that I used to do, again, this is a relatively recent change. I would draw in a sketchbook, but I wouldn't necessarily plan what I was going to paint, because I felt frustrated by the relationship of trying to turn a drawing into a painting, because there's different kinds of marks that you make, or like, you know, the thickness of a pencil compared with the thickness of the paintbrush that you then use when you like scale it up into a painting, and it always loses something in translation. So I stopped trying to plan the work, and I would generally just essentially do it off the top of my head when I came into the studio. But I've gone back to planning things a bit more, again, partly because of feeling precious about the studio time and
Did you do those here?
no, usually at home. Yeah, I think the headspace that I'm in the studio, and what I'm in, the headspace I'm in at home if I'm drawing, are quite different. I think I'd find it hard to get into the kind of like, I don't know if I'm just out of practice with it, but yeah, to get into that kind of generative headspace where you come up with stuff. I feel like I don't find it that easy to do that here anymore.
What's your process? Do you just start drawing, or does an idea come and then you start drawing it?
I think I generally kind of, I look at the last thing that I did and think about what will happen next, or I look back through and think, oh yeah, that was a kind of unresolved idea, I'll do more with that. But then part of the danger of that is that when I get to the end of a sketchbook, I totally forget what was in the last one. Sometimes I have to kind of keep 2 or 3 around and sort of look through them. But like what I was saying earlier about how I'm kind of going back to some of the ideas. So yeah, the library ones that I've done, 3 big library ones in the last year, and they're based on an older painting from about 5 years ago, because I was looking back at old work and just felt like there was the suggestion of more in that work. So yeah, now I am kind of planning what I do much more, but keen to sort of try to maintain an idea of spontaneity in the image. Like I never used to grid things out, but I have started to do that, but then just sort of use that gridded out under drawing as the suggestion, and usually it changes through the course of doing the work. But yeah, so this one that I've just started this morning, that's the one that I'm working from, so I've traced that and gridded it. But there was a few other versions of that drawing that I could have worked with. And the process of doing those is kind of like putting the main bits in, so probably like putting the heads in first and then like working from that. Maybe like next putting the hands in, and then fitting everything in around each other. But yeah, I think I'm probably going to do, so yeah, there's like another page of kind of similar stuff, but I don't really know why. I just actually, came in this morning, had a day to do some painting for the first time in ages, and looked through this and decided that that was the one I was going to do next, and just, it felt like it had a good, quite like to make the images that I make at the moment not, your eye doesn't settle in one place for too long.
Yeah.
They keep you moving or have a kind of internal flow around them. So yeah, that one felt successful. But yeah, there's a few other kind of similar ones that I'll probably work from in the future. But yeah, definitely drawing in relation to painting, I suppose, particularly if you're trying to if you're not working in an abstract way or in a way where the painting process fully informs the image that you end up with, then it's just useful as the kind of like idea generating stage, or definitely to get into the kind of headspace of possibility, like that you can do when you I suppose, because drawing's like the sort of easiest, perhaps the easiest form of making things that you can do. It's like it's the quickest, the most direct. It's the best way to bring ideas out of your head and make them a real thing, as opposed to a painting that take a long time to make real.
That's good. Can't think of anything else to ask.
I feel like I should ask you more questions, but don't know if that's the...
You write songs, don't you?
Yeah,
For your band.
Yeah.
Do they relate to the work?
Sometimes I've used looking at old work as a way to generate lyrics, by just sort of describing what's happening in a painting, or like almost sort of as artist statements, or like ways to distill an idea in different form, because lyrics is good as a kind of, you have to have a form of writing in which you have to be quite economical and quite spare and choose your words wisely, and so yeah, that can be enjoyable. I think all of my concerns across all forms of making things are kind of similar. Like it's all about pretty similar set of ideas or ways of looking at the world.
I think they do relate. There's like one that you talk about patting yourself on the back or something. I don't know. Maybe you just said that after singing something.
Yeah, that might have been a caption on an Instagram post.
Oh yeah.
I might have said something like "give yourself a back on the pat."
Back on the pat. Yeah.
Yeah. There's usually a fair bit of like playing around with language and the kind of sometimes trying to make things that are a bit like sort of serialist pop songs or like kind of things that slightly deconstruct how pop music normally works, or take that form, the accepted 3-minute pop song, and like try to make it catchy and successful on that level, but then also subtly kind of interject some ideas in there that, again, like a song that you would want to sing along with is like quite a direct way to puncture ideas into people's heads without them realising it, or like I suppose maybe like the nearest thing in terms of that sort of mode of making music, not necessarily that the music that we do sounds like that, but I suppose like Devo or a band like that, and sort of like subtly deconstructing things, but not in a necessarily a kind of postmodernist, ironic kind of way. I'm not really interested in irony. I'm more just interested in the sort of like miraculous, unexpected things, that directions that things could move in if you take them somewhere else. Like,
they kind of feel comedic
mm.
in a way, but maybe that's because they're not of this world.
Yeah.
Not like they've transcended it, like above it, but like alongside it, like in a different dimension or something.
Yeah.
Because of the use of language, or I don't know.
Is this music or paintings or both? Or
yeah, everything.
Yeah. One of the artists that I like a lot, and I suppose has had quite an influence on my sort of the ideas that the sort of frame of mind that I'm working in at the moment, is Ryan Trecartin, and partially through writing about him on my masters and spending a lot more time thinking about that work and reading interviews with him and thinking about the things that he's said. But yeah, his work has a similar thing, perhaps, in which it's funny, but it's not like, it could kind of just look like stupid videos that people would make for the internet just to try and make their friends laugh, but it's kind of got that layer to it. But it's sort of like that's almost like that's the first thing you come to, is the first thing is the laugh, and then the second, the laugh isn't the punchline, it's like
I did show a friend who is also a musician, and he didn't like it.
What, Ryan Trecartin, or?
No, your work.
Oh yeah.
Your music, like a music video that you shot downstairs.
Yeah.
I can't remember what he said about it. Something funny.
Something funny.
Yeah. Like maybe he's saying like, oh, there's a bunch of teachers or something. which is strange. Do you think you'll act your age? Is that something you ever think about? Age.
We're all children in the eyes of the Lord. I would hope that I don't seem like I'm just trying to be flippant about things, or like suggest that everything is just a big joke. Like, I think that I suppose is the kind of like ironic postmodernist removal that I'm not that interested in. And I'm not really that interested in art that is trying to be funny, I think.
Not interested in postmodern. What?
I don't know, what did I say?
Remove.
You'll have to rewind it, and
Can't.
I kind of like, you know, sort of like to suggest that if as it's like Nietzsche's thing of like the last man of history is, you know, you've seen it all and seen it all, done it all, been there, got the t-shirt, and the world is inherently kind of preposterous and ridiculous, and like the only I don't know, what's that like weird phrase, like the only sane reaction in an insane world is to laugh or something like that, like that you know the kind of like stance of postmodernism is just to sort of shrug it all off as everything is a kind of farce, or sort of.
But you don't like that.
No, I think there's I think that's the kind of nihilism that I don't subscribe to, and I kind of enjoy thinking of myself as a credulist rather than a nihilist in terms of like I enjoy believing in things in the same way as the kind of maximalism that I was talking about earlier, in which you never deny anything or say no or like restrict. I'm kind of
Non-indulgent maximalism.
What was the first part you said?
Non-indulgent.
Non-indulgent maximalism.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I suppose I think in terms of like...
Because you're not picking everything. If you're just looking at archetypes, you're not just looking at archetypes. Because archetypes stuck out to me, and maximalism didn't make that much sense when looking at your work. I mean, lots of everyone does lots of things, but they don't think about everything they've done in a day and think they've achieved anything, even though they've done lots of things, because they do it every day. I don't know what I'm talking about. You know, if you try and think of everything you've done in a day, even if you've not done anything, you have done something, because you've got up and made yourself a cup of tea and stretched and breathed, thought things, reacted to things.
Yeah, I mean, there's the kind of version that we distill down through our sensory perception and then into our kind of cognitive sense making, and then you end up with a kind of narrative of like, and then there's the kind of the level of values and ethics that gets applied to that, where you might think, I've not done anything of worth today, or whatever.
Right.
But then there's the version of reality is kind of a bad word to use because it has too many cringeworthy connotations, but I suppose, you know, the world as is, as opposed to the world as lived, in which everything unfolds everything unfolds this idea again of the kind of mesh of flat, sort of like compressed mesh of possibility that all of this information that we filter out, like all of the what's occurring at the kind of micro and macro level, and that we can only function as human beings because we choose what to block out or what to pay attention to, or figure all of these things in anthropomorphic terms. I can't really remember how we ended up down this route, but I suppose.
Well, I often think about work and labour and stuff, and how that takes up a lot of people's lives, and sleeping, and then not really much time for anything else. Do you ever really think about leisure activities?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's something I've thought about quite a bit. That was in that green painting, and things that I was doing at that point in time. I was specifically thinking about leisure.
Yeah. Free time.
Yeah.
What's that?
And they're kind of slightly aesthetically have a relationship with Seurat's Sunday à la Grande Jatte, like the one of the people next to the river.
La Grande Jatte.
Yeah, in the park in Paris, and so it's people outside of their subjectivity as industrialized beings in their leisure time, and their kind of what it is to be outside of the relationship, the mechanisms of capital, or
Yeah. That painting doesn't really feel like that's something they've chosen to do. That's like there's something that you're told you should be doing when you've got time to do it. Lie in this sort of man-made or man-designed landscape. It's like a sort of almost like quite a perfect bit of land near some water. And the only thing making it seem natural is, I suppose, because it's sort of impressionist colours, lots of white, lots of bright colours. But I suppose some of them, I think there's some dresses that are like round. That could feel a bit more mechanical in a way. Like your jugs.
Yeah.
Same sort of shape. I'm trying to think of that painting. Famous painting.
I've got a Seurat book around here somewhere. But it's kind of subtly stylized. Like those figures all feel they feel quite solid. But they're not people. They're not people in the kind of. They're not people like you and me. They're not people of kind of flesh and blood and again they're kind of expressionless and sort of just kind of populating that scene without intent really. They're kind of just sort of stranded there, abandoned. but yeah, so the idea of leisure in the series of paintings that I was doing of people holding the jugs and sort of essentially just kind of having time to be in relationship to other people, or like to be in a crowd, or drink together, or they're not necessarily like they're having fun, they're just being in relationship with each other.
Weird. You spend a lot of time in your own mind, sort of thinking about these things.
Well, we're all in our minds all the time, aren't we?
I guess.
Sometimes I'm thinking, sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm just doing things and not thinking anything.
No.
Just being sometimes. That's quite good as well.
Just being. Does anything you read inspire you?
I mean, yeah, in terms of
How philosophical are nursery rhymes? Because your work's sort of like a children's book, but it's not.
yeah,
And you're talking all this philosophical sort of way about things that maybe should be simple but aren't. Do you read storybooks? Novels?
Do you mean, when you say storybooks, do you mean like children's books? Or?
I guess, or fictional books, stories.
Yeah. Not as much. I don't read as much as I've read more in the past. I'm not really reading that kind of thing that much at the moment. I just sort of read fiction at night time to make me sleep. But yeah, ideally more likely to be reading things that are more kind of theory, or writing about culture and ideas and stuff. But how philosophical are nursery rhymes? I mean, yeah, all of.
Do you think they're just statements or a set of instructions rather than questioning anything?
I think it's kind of all in the reading, isn't it? And like that again is like a bit of a cop-out way to look at things, but you can read anything in pretty much in any work of, you can take any like Hollywood film and draw out a huge number of kind of stories about what humans are and what it is to be a person, and something that's very simple in a lot of ways it's easier to, it leaves a lot of space and gaps to draw sort of solid or complex conclusions from that, whether you treat the material metaphorically or symbolically, but I think again, more interested in feeling, like affect and feeling, and how certain formations make you feel, whether that's lyrically or musically or and I think a lot of what there is contained within children's culture. Like a lot of the most important stuff is kind of boiled down into a more direct form in what we give to children or what children enjoy. And then I suppose just from the things that I've enjoyed as a child or been exposed to, like what I was talking about earlier, to do with kind of like N64 era video games, or whether that's sort of Raymond Briggs children's books, or I was quite into old Doctor Who when I was a child, and like the 70s Doctor Who, because they used to repeat them on the BBC when I was a child. So I kind of, I think, always been a bit interested in. I like things that are being made now as well, but I think that the things that I valued in all of those was that they had a spookiness or a kind of feeling within them that has become increasingly rare in the popular culture that, at least that I engage with, that's being made now. And it's a kind of like unintentional generation of affect, a kind of looseness around the edges, where I think the way that film and TV is produced now, perhaps a lot of the time there's too much control over, you're being directed to feel a certain way. So it's like somewhere in a Mark Fisher essay says something about like modern reality TV is all about who's having the good feelings and who's having the bad feelings, and you're never in doubt about who that is, because it's he refers to it as like just that, like, people bursting into tears on TV has become much more of a thing. And like people hugging each other, having these kind of like moments of elation. And this isn't like a kind of stiff upper lip thing. This is just to do with that maybe at some point in the past there was more of an ambiguity about how you were meant to feel about things. Like the makers of TV programs, for example, maybe weren't trying to manipulate. Manipulate is too malicious a word, but like, it wasn't boiled down into a sort of simple set of like, I feel happy or I feel sad about this. It's more complex, more kind of nuanced set of things that you could feel, like, I don't know, kind of a melancholy or types of affect that might be generated that we don't have names for. So I think all of those things have kind of, from that I have engaged with as a child, have inevitably, I mean, we're all formed in childhood, aren't we, really? Like, we're all pretty much, our lives are kind of set out, or like the main concerns that you're going to be thinking about for quite a long time get laid down at that point.
Yeah.
But again, like coming back to Wittgenstein, there's a story about that he stayed with Philip de Barlow's family when Philip de Barlow was a child, because I think maybe her dad was I don't know if it's something to do with, because Wittgenstein worked in a hospital in London in, I the 1940s or around that point in time, and that he looked at I think I'm getting this right, I think it is Wittgenstein, looked at a children's book that was in their house and said, you know, like this, I can't remember what children's book it was, but basically said like, this is the most significant work of philosophy, like all of human life is here. It's all, you know, philosophy can become very complex, very, you know, have its own set of linguistics, or like in the case of someone like Wittgenstein, become algebra, or, you know, very far removed from trying to boil things down to a view of what's happening, or, you know, a view of what it is to be human, or to exist, or to be. But if you can point to those things in simple ways, then that, you know, that's much more effective or much more powerful. So I think that's one of the things that art is good for.
Cool.
Maybe that's
Do you want to wrap up?
yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably a good point to. I don't know how
Thanks,
long
Dan.
I've